Great. Joanne and Sean, should we start now?
Going live now. Good.
Okay, great.
Okay, let me just introduce the committee meeting. Welcome to the Executive Committee meeting of Community Board 14. Today is September 9th. It is 6:34 p.m. Eastern Daylight Standard Time. Welcome, everyone. I just want to wish Shana Tova to all of our neighbors and board members who have celebrated Rosh Hashanah. May the next 8 days of repentance and prayer bring a year of compassion, justice, and good fortune. May your upcoming fast be easy. We have a very full agenda tonight. I expect that the conversation regarding the following presentation will be robust. The agenda will be the zoning text amendment, open restaurants, presented by Jonah Rogoff, and he is joined by DOT Dash Henley. After that, we will do a short new member orientation. We will review the current meeting policy of CB14 and then discuss other business. So without further ado, Jonah, I'm happy to hear your presentation. Please go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. And thanks to the whole committee and to the other board members. I'll just do a really quick intro while I pull up the presentation. So I think most of you know me, and again, it's great to be here, and I hope everyone had a wonderful summer. Shana Tova, if you're celebrating Rosh Hashanah. I'm Jonah Rogoff, for those who don't know me. I'm a planner who in the Department of City Planning that covers Community District 14. I'm also joined by Dash Henley from the New York City Department of Transportation, who will be co-presenting with me, and Kate Richard, who is more of our local subject matter expert within the Brooklyn Office of City Planning. So we're really delighted to be here to discuss the open restaurants proposal. And just to give you a preview, we're going to divide the proposal into two presentations. The first part will be led by Dash to talk more about how the permanent restaurant, open restaurant program will be designed and implemented. And then myself will be covering the second part, where we'll be focused on the zoning text amendment proposal, which is currently before the community board's review. And with that, let me share my presentation. Can everybody see?
Yep, looks great. Thank you.
Great. So I'll just turn it over to Dash.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jonah. And thank you, everyone, for allowing us to come before you today. As Jonah said, my name is Dash Henley. I'm a planner with the New York City Department of Transportation in our Brooklyn Borough Commissioner's Office. And I'm here to present on the very preliminary plans for DOT's permanent open restaurants program, which would give restaurants the option of both sidewalk and roadway seating for outdoor dining. And the program is looking to balance the many needs of street and sidewalk, keeping both restaurants and other users in the community in mind. And finally, the program is going to take what we've learned in the past year and a half of running the temporary program, as well as prior experience with outdoor dining when developing the permanent future guidelines. But I just want to make it clear, and I know Jonah already pretty much did, is that this presentation will cover both sidewalk and roadway dining, but what's before the boards right now is the specific sidewalk cafe text amendment. So the part about the roadway dining is very much preliminary. And next slide. Or one more, because I already said this as well. Thanks. So as most folks already know, the city had street cafes well before COVID, but we had far fewer of them. We had sidewalk cafes, as you can see here, which were administered by what used to be called the Department of Consumer Affairs and what's now called the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. DOT ourselves did run one small pilot of public roadway seating, which we called street seats on the right-hand corner of this slide. but there were very few setups, just 25 of them. Most of them were in Manhattan, and it's our understanding that the relatively low participation in that program was due in large part to both the costs and the process associated with participation. Next slide, please. So as a result of COVID, in response to it, we created the Open Restaurants Program. And to do so, the city suspended existing rules through an emergency executive order, and DOT was able to create a fast and simple way for restaurants to conduct their business in the public right away. And since the launch a little over a year ago, over 11,000 restaurants have participated in the program, and it's estimated that that has helped save 100,000 jobs that would have otherwise been lost. And by many accounts, the program has not just been a lifesaver for those restaurants and restaurant industry, but also has shown the incredible vitality of the city, and also, that there was a small beacon of hope in what could be done with these spaces to reimagine a better future. Next slide, please. All of that being said, we know that there have been both successes and challenges these past year, and we've tried to learn both the positive and negative lessons from those in order to inform how we proceed with the permanent program. So on the positive side, we think that the robust use of the emergency program was helped by three things. First, unlike the pre-COVID program, no geographies were off limits. So any restaurant that had ground floor frontage and sidewalk or roadway space that met siting criteria could participate. Also, the program was free and it was easy to access, unlike the pre-COVID Sidewalk Cafe program, which required many months of public review by multiple agencies. And third, the element of roadway dining, the new element, gave restaurants a brand new option and was particularly good for those that might not have had enough room on the sidewalk, as well as certainly space indoors when indoor dining wasn't allowed. Some of the challenges we've had, though, the past year are also worth considering, and we've learned lessons from those of how to incorporate into the permanent program. One was the speed of the rollout, and the fact that it was built from scratch meant that there was some confusion with regulations, and those regulations had to be changed over time. So some of the guidance changed, and that was understandably frustrating for restaurants that were participating in it. Furthermore, some of the other challenges were specific to the roadway themselves. So we know that we need to keep on top of coordination with other agencies, such as the fire department, to ensure that any structure meets all of their requirements for emergency services. And finally, in terms of enforcement, we've had to strike a balance between restaurants who don't want to be overly burdened by regulations and have unfair expectations for their setups and how they might need to change them, but also the fact that we need to have to make sure that regulations are properly enforced, particularly in terms of accessibility, making sure that the sidewalks are clear where they need to be, and that any setups are not where they shouldn't be. Next, please. So all of that being said, we think the program's been a massive success, and the City Council voted late last year to establish a permanent program, and the mayor has charged us with doing so. And that requires a change to a number of different laws that control outdoor dining in non-emergency situations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're proposing for the permanent program, and then get back to the topic of those legal changes. Next, please. So we anticipate that, as in the emergency, DOT will administer the permanent option for both sidewalk seating and roadway seating, with similar rules to current sidewalk cafes, but they will be available citywide. Next, please. And when final specific design guidelines are out, we want them to be very clear, and we know that they will revolve around the principles that I spoke of before that balance the use of that sidewalk space by a restaurant, but maximizes the experience and openness to the general public. And notably, the size and the scale of cafes will be defined by the size of the street and the street furniture and sidewalk. Next, please. And with that in mind, for most of the city, the old 8-foot rule will hold, where you have to provide 8-foot clearance on sidewalks. But we're exploring some other options in special cases. And I know that Jonah will talk a little bit more about that in his presentation. Next, please. So switching gears a little bit, something else we learned is that it's very difficult to have these programs all year. So we envision that the permanent program itself will be a seasonal program, so it won't be operational in the winter. And with that in mind, just to point out that the permanent program will not take effect until 2023. So all of the current setups now are part of that temporary program and would be allowed to continue um, through the winter of 2022. So we want to just reassure that that transition will be somewhat of a long transition, so that those participating in the program now will not have to um, quickly take out those structures. We're also looking at an option for hardship waivers for those that might have trouble removing those in the winter. But we are looking to make this program seasonal going forward. Next slide, please. So in looking at both moving the legal authority to run the program to DOT and in creating the new processes for roadway setups, we're looking to streamline the review process as much as possible while leaving in place the essential roles of agency and public review. And next slide, please. In order to make that a reality, we need to go through these 3 steps to advance to making it permanent. So the first one, which is the focus of the measure before you today, is the removal of locational prohibitions in zoning. So it's really key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability here, and also centering that control and accountability under single agency, that we make that happen. And then after that, we're looking to work with the city council to enact appropriate legislation that would update the laws governing sidewalk cafes, and then creating a new set of rules to govern roadway cafes. Next, please. So following these legal changes from the previous page, we anticipate that the timeline will look a little bit like this. I know Jonah will go into this in a little more detail in his presentation. But all of these steps would need to happen before a formal opening up of the application window for the new program, which again will not go into effect until 2023. Next, please. So with that being said, we want to let restaurants know that there should be some, and the community know that there should be some form of expectation of certainty through that, and that there's ample time to transition into the new process if restaurants choose to participate in it. But changing zoning is the first critical step to making this program permanent. And there are multiple steps in that process, each of which welcomes public input and review. And finally, as Jonah said before, we're really excited to make this program permanent. We think that COVID has really reshaped the way New Yorkers think about our streets and how they can be used in different ways. And we think that it's been a real silver lining in an otherwise understandably awful time. And we're looking for feedback to that end, how to make that permanent program work for everybody. And Once again, just to remind you that the primary purpose of this tonight is the Sidewalk Cafe proposal. This roadway work is very preliminary, so we will have further details next year on that. But with the Sidewalk Cafe portion in mind, I will transfer you back over to Jonah to discuss it in more detail. And I'll be available here afterwards with Diana to answer questions as well. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Dash. So now we'll turn to the second part of the presentation. I'll be walking you through the zoning text amendment component of the proposal. So just to summarize, the proposed text amendment would remove Article 1, Chapter 4 of the zoning resolution and a few other areas that relate to sidewalk cafes. And this would essentially allow any restaurant to apply to DOT for a sidewalk cafe if they can meet the required clear path and siting criteria. So it would, in essence, just remove zoning as a barrier. To give some background on sidewalk cafes, as many of you know, they've been a part of the New York City streetscape for decades, if not centuries, and the laws governing cafes have evolved over time. Up until the COVID-19 pandemic, when many sidewalk cafe rules were suspended to allow the open restaurants program, zoning regulated where cafes could or could not locate. So on the slide, you can see that zoning generally groups sidewalk cafes into three categories. The most common being an unenclosed cafe, which allows for removable chairs, tables, and fencing with no allowable overhead coverage other than umbrellas or retractable roofs. There are also small sidewalk cafes, a type of an unenclosed cafe, which contains no more than a single row of tables and chairs adjacent to the street line, and it can extend no farther than 4.5 feet from a building. Lastly, there are fully enclosed cafes, which are essentially just building extensions into the sidewalk. So, as I mentioned, zoning districts where sidewalk cafes are allowed I guess just to quickly point out, this can be viewed fully online using our zoning and land use portal known as ZOLA. Generally speaking, sidewalk cafes are not allowed in residential only districts, which are shown in blue, and really comprise the majority of the area within the city. They're also not allowed in areas in red, where there are major sources of conflict, like in dense pockets of Midtown or directly underneath elevated subway lines. In yellow are areas where only small cafes are allowed. In purple are areas where only unenclosed and small cafes are allowed. And then in green are areas where all types of sidewalk cafes are allowed. So Dash really hit this home, but I just want to reiterate that, in response to the pandemic, much of our economy went on pause in March of 2020, which directly resulted in a ban on indoor dining. This action had a drastic impact on the restaurant industry, which we estimate experienced a drop of 64% in employment during the winter to summer of 2020. To provide support for the restaurant industry and the need to move dining indoors, the Open Restaurants program really allowed restaurants to use the sidewalks and roadways, which was only achieved because zoning rules were suspended that prohibited sidewalk cafes in certain areas. Dash covered this, but just to again say that in total, over 11,500 restaurants participate in the program, which included a huge surge of outdoor dining in Brooklyn and outside of Manhattan. We also estimate that approximately 100,000 restaurant industry jobs were saved had the city not allowed outdoor dining. And in connection with that, we believe that this program, again, has been a huge lifeline for many small businesses, for the industry, while also adding value and vibrancy to our streets and sidewalks as the city recovers from the pandemic. So during the emergency program, approximately 2,500 businesses, restaurants were permitted in areas that would not have been prohibited, that would have been prohibited or limited by existing zoning. And just looking at the map on the right, in red are restaurants in specific areas that were prohibited by zoning, which include certain special zoning districts, commercial corridors, below elevated transit lines, or other busy, congested areas like Midtown, as I mentioned. In blue are restaurants located in residential districts where the current zoning does not allow restaurants, but these are grandfathered in due to their commercial use predating zoning. And then in yellow are cafes in areas that would have been limited to small cafes only. We're also proposing some cleanup actions in the text amendment, removing definitions and cross-references to cafes, removing text that precludes operable windows that service outdoor restaurants, ensuring that no enclosure provisions require a restaurant to be fully indoors as a condition of its zoning district, and clarifying sidewalk widening text to ensure that it doesn't conflict with the operation of the open restaurants program. And just to provide some context within CD14, so currently in the areas in blue are where are residential districts where sidewalk cafes under current zoning are not allowed. The green areas are the commercial corridors ranging from busy corridors like Flatbush to more local retail corridors like Cortellu or Avenues J and M. And then on McDonald Avenue is an example of an elevated transit line that specifically prohibited sidewalk cafes. And then this is a map showing where licenses were granted for sidewalk cafes prior to the pandemic. And as far as we can tell, there were only 2 that were granted, one of which you can see it was at the corner of Cortellu and Westminster Roads. And then this is a map showing the open restaurants within Community District 14. Under the program, approximately 82 restaurants have been participating within the board, 11 of which would have been prohibited under current zoning due to their location in a residential zoning district. The text amendment would allow these cafes the opportunity to apply in a non-emergency setting, but again, only if they meet the citing rules and criteria that DOT lays out. So just to summarize, we're really at the start of a multi-pronged process, starting with the text amendment proposal, which is currently under review by community boards and the borough president, and then would be followed by the City Planning Commission and City Council. We do anticipate City Council actions to be underway during this period, continuing the process of updating the Sidewalk Cafe program, fleshing out the roadway cafe authority through DOT's rulemaking process. We do not expect the full program launch until late 2022 or early 2023 at the earliest, which should also allow more time for restaurants to fully transition to the permanent program if they choose to do so. And with that, we're happy to take any questions and listen to concerns and hear your feedback.
Thank you very much, Jonah and Dash. So this item is going before the City Planning Commission on September 27th, correct?
Let me check the exact date. September 27th is the day that the community board's review ends, but I believe it's actually the following review session. I can pull that up. I believe it's October 6th, but let me double check.
Okay. So just some instructions to the executive committee and interested board members here tonight. We have a very short timeline to analyze this and make a recommendation. I think it would be in our best interest to have a conversation tonight so that we can make a recommendation to the full board at Monday's general meeting. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Carl, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and thank you very much, Jonah and Dash, for that presentation. And so I guess I'll be brief. So the first one is the deadline is September 27th. There was an attachment that we had internally that said the 90-day review began as of June 30th, but the community boards were out during the summer. And so my first question is that September 27th a hard deadline? Because that would mean about 2/3 of the review process timeframe, community boards were not in session, so to speak. And then the second question I have is, if the September 27th deadline is immutable, does this mean that in parallel, the agencies are talking with DOT and city planning, just because I'm sure sanitation and FDNY would have their concerns or comments too? So I'm just wondering, I saw that arrow about community boards, but I'm wondering, is there another parallel arrow happening where these conversations are also happening with other city agencies?
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate that question. So I just want to clarify something that Kate reminded me of. So we actually haven't scheduled the CPC public hearing yet. And as soon as we have that information, we'll be sure to share it. Generally speaking, I've been through a number of text amendments, and we try to adhere to the deadlines as much as possible, but of course, we always welcome recommendations from the board. And our policy internally is generally, if you're submitting the recommendation before the vote, we'll be sure to include it and take into consideration. The reason being is we attach the community board's recommendation to the CPC or City Planning Commission report that's drafted. So I would say generally, we would encourage the board to review it within that time period, but if you need additional time, we're happy to work with you. And as the local liaison, I want to be sure, to the best of my ability, that your feedback is incorporated into the proposal.
And
Thank you.
just to answer the question on coordination with other agencies, that's definitely happening now and will continue to happen with all of those, including the ones you mentioned. Yes.
Okay. Thank you both of you for answers.
Barden, go ahead if you have questions or comments.
Okay, thanks. Again, thanks to you both for the presentation. So Jonah, I guess you'd said that there are 82 in CD14 and 11 of those are going to be normalized on the basis of the change in the text. Is that correct?
Yes. So by normalize, it just means that the ones that are in residential zoning areas where new commercial use is not allowed, but those uses are grandfathered in, those businesses will have the opportunity to have a sidewalk cafe,
Okay.
where current zoning does not really give them that opportunity.
Speaking of opportunity, I guess that's sort of where I'm headed, is I'm going to guess that the neighbors surrounding those 11 are not entirely aware that this text amendment would now make permanent what had been temporary. And so I think it would behoove us somehow to, get the locations of those 11 and notify, the residents nearby that this text amendment is going to have a significant impact on that.
I would love to partner with you and the board. I think one of the great assets of CB14 is that you have this strong network of local block associations and neighborhood groups. So more than happy to do that. And I think a lot of them actually are interspersed around the Ditmas Park, Newkirk area is in the map, which we'll share.
That'd be
later on.
great. Thanks.
Yeah.
And just one other question, I think it's more for Dash. Since I realize that you're in the preliminary phase of, assessing the roadway cafes, any sense of how many parking places throughout either CD14 or Brooklyn are sort of at stake on the basis of the decision?
No, I don't have that information. Yeah, in that granular detail yet. But what I will say is that when looking at how many places are participating now versus how many we think will be in the permanent program, we don't think there will be, and this isn't necessarily specific to this area, but citywide, we don't think there will be as many participants in the permanent program as the temporary one.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I will say that. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm done.
Joe Dweck, go ahead.
Thank you, Joanne, and thanks, Dash and Jonah. A couple questions, and please forgive my ignorance of the current process, but to my knowledge, previously there were restrictions about attaching a tent-like structure to a building, and similarly, and also there are restrictions about the heaters that can be in these structures as well. Both of those issues are large issues for restaurants for people who go into restaurants and restaurants themselves in order to make people comfortable and dry and to try to extend the season towards the bad weather. So those are going to be important issues for them, not just the structures themselves or where they are. Thanks.
Jonah, I don't know if you have more information on the structures aspect of the question. I know the heaters has been an issue with, wanting to keep people comfortable. We hope that it will be less of an issue with the permanent program, given that we're looking to make it seasonal. Although I know there still will be issues with cold weather on the shoulders of those seasons as well.
The issue of not attaching a tent structure or a there was issues of canvas being attached to a building. We had to have special special permits for an awning, and these would in fact be awnings. So those issues would raise their heads on these.
Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. I would say, I guess two parts to that. First, I know that there are regulations in place now for the temporary program. Maybe we can just like put that in the chat so everyone's aware. But then second, with respect to awnings and tents, zoning actually does regulate that and will continue to regulate that along with DOB. So DOB has forms of review as well for types of awning, and as long as it's affixed to a building. And I don't know if it's worth getting into details of that, but I can provide more background if necessary.
Joanne, thanks, Dash and Jonah.
I have a couple of questions, and then Carl, and then Sean. So Dash, can you tell me how far along DOT is with creating the actual program? And I'm only going to hold you to the Sidewalk Cafe program since you haven't really gotten to the roadway program. So how far along is your program? Do you have a fee schedule? Do you have an enforcement schedule? How far along are you? You can give me your percentage. We are 80% along, 75% along.
That's a good question. I don't have it broken down by percentage, although that would be a good thing to have in the future. We are looking to operate the emergency program, like I was saying, through 2022. So we don't have, and we're certainly going to have more details on the permanent program before it comes into play in late 22, early 23. But we don't have any specific information on fees yet. And I know that's a question that's understandably come up. There will be some sort of fee structure in place. We do know that. And I'm trying to think of the other aspect to the program, but we're looking to come back for more information to the public in 2022 on both.
Okay, so the reason why I ask is because I and many others feel like, the zoning text amendment is really not the gateway. We're not understanding why you're putting the cart before the horse. The DOT program seems to me to be the force, and that should be driving the zoning text amendment. So you're asking us with very, very little time, when apparently you have until 2023 to make changes because you haven't planned out your program yet, to make decisions on zoning when you should actually have the program first and then ask us to make the decision on a zoning text amendment that's going to accommodate your program. So first and foremost, that's the big concern for me. The next question, and if you want to comment on that, go ahead, and then I'll ask my next question.
Sure. I think Jonah and Kate may be better able to speak on the intricacies of the zoning and how the timing of that works, but it's my understanding of just the schedule for how it works is that would allow us to that is the first step to allow us to do all of this and then come back with further information on the program. But I don't know if Jonah and Kate, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I'll just say that changing zoning text takes a lot of time, and this is still relatively early in the process. This would be going before the City Planning Commission and eventually City Council. So even though maybe the perception is that the zoning text amendment is being developed long before, I think I understand where DOT is coming from, and we're trying to align this as much as possible. Kate, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I would also just add that whatever the permanent program, once that is final and all the details have been worked out for that, this zoning change would still be necessary. It's moving administration of Sidewalk Cafes from the zoning to DOT, and that would happen whatever that final program looks like when it's fully fleshed out.
And then my second question, and I asked this question last night at the Borough Board, and I feel like I didn't really get the information that I needed, was in the permanent program, will restaurants that are interested in having sidewalk cafes or roadway cafes for that matter, will they need their landlord's approval? The answer that I got was there are provisions in the lease. So my question and concern is if it requires landlord approval, correct, in the application process, theoretically that could make public walkways and public roads privatized in some way and monetized by a landlord. So my concern is if it's monetized in a lease or monetized in a lease agreement, then we're narrowing the amount of, or who as a small business can afford a rent with additional square footage that isn't actually part of the commercial property.
Yeah, I totally understand that question, and I think what the representative from City Planning last night who answered that was saying was also that property owners can currently put that into their leases. So it's not too much of a change there in terms of that, but I definitely do hear what you're saying on what that means for the future and the different components of it. And I don't have a clearer answer to you on that right now.
Well, I mean, while they can still currently put that in their lease, that's only a very small subset of properties now under the current zoning. So now we're expanding the program, and you could be narrowing the, let's say, entrepreneurial spirit of a small restaurant that has that is going to sign a lease on a property that has fulfilled all of the qualifications to be able to have sidewalk seating. So that landlord, in essence, can be charging an entrepreneurial, a small business, an immigrant family who wants to, open a restaurant, a premium because now the space has been cleared in front of the unit for a sidewalk cafe. So I just want to bring that out as a pitfall that should be thought of. I'm going to go ahead and give Carl the floor. He has another question.
Sure. Thank you very much, Joanne. And there were a few things you said in your questions and comments that I'd like to piggyback off of. And so at one point, Joanne had mentioned enforcement. And so that's the thread that I want to continue on. The plan that is being proposed, it looks like it would be temporary through 2022 and then be permanent in 2023. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so then the question I have is about enforcement and administration, which is basically the people who are currently responsible for the administration and the enforcement of the temporary program. Are the agencies budgeting for the fact that in 2023 it would be the same people, or would it be net new?
Yes, and sorry, I forgot, Joanne, that you brought that up before, and I meant to answer it. So yes, DOT is currently enforcing the program and will in the future, and we are planning to ramp up enforcement and do have that budgeted. And we put out the job posting for a director of open restaurants a short time ago. I don't know if it's still available on the website, but that's just one of the first steps we're taking, as well as expanding our enforcement team to handle it going forward. And in terms of the temporary program, like I said, we are enforcing it, and if there are issues with specific locations, the community board can bring those to us, or individuals can report them on their own via 311 or on either through calling or online, and those get sent to us to enforce.
Okay, thank you.
District Manager Sean Campbell.
Thanks. I'm going to try to be concise and defer to the chair to cut me off if I don't manage that. Just as a sort of context to my concerns, I think anytime we're giving away public space for private profit, we need to make sure that we are clear about what the public good is in that. I mean, normally when we do that, we have, there's a lot of process, and I get that this is a revocable consent, so we're not actually giving the space away, but DOT is actually supposed to be the gatekeepers to the right of way. So to be, tossing it out into the yard sale it just makes me nervous. And I don't know that you even have enough information and enough answers to provide a cost benefit analysis of this program. If you don't know how many parking spots we're giving away, you don't know what your fee structure is going to be, you don't know what the enforcement fee structure is going to look like, then, how do we know if this program is costing the city money? As we face a $5 billion budget shortfall in the coming year, or if there's going to be a net gain in the revenues from, keeping these businesses alive in this particular way. So that sort of financial concern, and then, to sort of just underscore what Joanne said, I don't know that there's been an analysis of future impacts on commercial rents. If a landlord can basically say that this space now has triple, in some of our spaces, we have triple the seats in a restaurant. So it's triple a square foot, and the impact that has on neighboring businesses that are not restaurants in terms of the ripple effect on commercial rents. Speaking of other businesses, we already have complaints and concerns about them being able to get delivery. And so I don't know if this proposal is taken into consideration delivery windows, other vendors, zero viz streets, vendor restricted streets, and all of those other, agency implications for this. So I'm just worried about, to just repeat Joanne's phrase, putting the cart before the horse. We don't know what the actual program is going to look like, but we have to greenlight your way to it, and it just makes me nervous. Enforcement makes me very concerned because, noise complaints are notoriously difficult to have enforced. DOT is not an enforcement agency when it comes to quality of life issues, so taking on that new role, I don't know what that would look like. Responding to noise complaints or people blocking tree pits, how quick are you going to be on that? I can probably stop there. Oh, calling 311. Right now, if you call 311, they're telling you that my phone number here at CB14 is how you reach Eric Adams. So, they're not always on the ball with calls coming in. So I worry about that as being the main vehicle for complaints. And DOT enforcement, are you going to participate in March operations? And I have a whole slew of other ones, but I feel like the answer, it isn't teased out yet. And so greenlighting something that isn't defined, for a community board, I think is scary. I'm scared. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Just to respond to a couple of those, sorry to hear that 311 is forwarding all of Eric Adams' calls to you. That sounds awful. It's certainly not the way it should be. We definitely, like I said before, if you and others have issues that can be brought to the community board with these locations and you want to forward it directly to our office, Diana is here tonight and she's wonderful and we'll take care of those to bypass 311. But we certainly, I can definitely tell you that we are getting 311 reports for these, and we are able to go out and, for the most part, easily fix issues once we have them with restaurants. We think that most restaurants are trying to do the right thing, and a lot of times when they're not doing the right thing, it's not intentional, and we go out and we tell them to correct it, and they do. I know I've dealt with a few of them one-on-one in the past few months doing that. In terms of noise, I definitely hear you. It's an ongoing issue. It's an issue before COVID. It's an issue in any and every city, which doesn't make it excusable. In terms of the rules for the permanent program, the no amplified sound will be allowed. It's not allowed in the current program. It won't be in the current program. It won't be in the permanent program. Although we know that that doesn't mean just because we have that rule that it will necessarily be followed by everyone, of course. So in terms of enforcement with that, it would remain under NYPD's purview. So 311 and other complaints would continue to go via local precincts for that. And then just finally, in terms of use of public space, it's definitely a challenge with every use we have, and we know that there's a lot of competing uses on the sidewalk and the curb and in the public right of way, and that's not something that we do take lightly, nor should we. And we, that being said, we do think that the program citywide has been a success and has been popular and well used, and we hope that that would be the case going forward. I'm not sure if Jonah has anything to add.
Yeah, I would just thank you, Sean. I'm taking down these notes, and I think this process is very valuable for both us and DOT, and I mean that wholeheartedly. That this is a proposal that's being fleshed out. The zoning text amendment is a bit more fleshed out because we are ready to propose that. We think that that's a really critical first step. But the actual program, as Dash mentioned a number of times, is still being developed. So we greatly welcome your feedback, and we're also happy to share more lessons that we've learned. I would just maybe speak to the broader planning goal. I think as planners, we often see the areas of streets. We like to support active streetscapes and better utilizing parking areas for public purposes, whether or not it's for a restaurant, which is a private purpose, but at the same time, it helps enliven a street, bring activity, and whether that's business or people or visitors. So I think for all the points you said, that those are all valid. I guess I would just, present maybe a counter to that, in the sense that the open restaurants program really adds vitality to our streets. And, as we, I would encourage the board to help us develop that and get it right. And from a macro level, but also from a micro level, looking at, what's happening on the ground on each each of these businesses. So yeah, this is a really helpful conversation, and we want to continue that dialogue uh, as part of the text amendment, but just in general.
I was remiss in not acknowledging Diana Soriano, our liaison at DOT, who does work really hard for us. And this board throws a lot her way. We keep her really, really busy. I just, tossed, I think, 30 or 40 follow-ups to her just this past week. So
I'm still working on those, by the way.
thank you.
Alvin Burke has a question. Go ahead, Alvin.
I realize that you've already started considering the implications of this for other agencies, including sanitation. But it occurs to me that there are capital concerns that have to be recognized here in terms of street reconstruction and whether the city will absolve itself of any liability for airing the operation of the street cafes during reconstruction of streets, and whether it will be built into the law that the city council promulgates, protecting the city's rights. Similarly, the operational side, question of sidewalk cleaning and street cleaning, the 18-inch rule into the roadbed will need to be modified. This is all to say that Joanne Brown, our chairman's concerns about the sequence in which this is being presented to the community boards and to the borough presidents, to the city, has some pitfalls to support her concern. These operational concerns have to be considered carefully before boards know whether we want to support this or not. It's hard to make a decision on the zoning implications of it. But we'll have to condition our approval carefully, make sure that if we do want to approve this, we're approving just the narrow zoning considerations and not the program itself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for both of those points. In terms of the cleaning, what we've done in the temporary program is to make sure that the locations that are built out have to be designed in a certain way to allow water to flow. And because the street cleaners can't go through them, of course, it's been the responsibility of the individual business owners to maintain the cleanliness of those specific sites. And we know that sometimes doesn't always work out best. So we're looking to have further, more spelled out guidelines in the permanent program for how to handle that. And in terms of the capital conflicts, that's definitely an issue. In the temporary program, as part of the agreement, locations have had to confirm that they are okay with having to remove those structures if necessary because of a capital project. So they know that, and that happened to happen at least once recently with a project, and the restaurant owners were understanding with that, and it was fine. But obviously, it's not an ideal situation to have a structure that you then have to remove. So it's a really good point, and something that we need to take into account to formalize a little bit more in the permanent program.
I do want to point out that on Flatbush Avenue between Caton Avenue and Clarkson, I believe, when the road was resurfaced about 3 weeks ago, the roadbed cafes were not removed. They were paved around them. So I just want to point that out, that doesn't always happen.
Right. In terms of the resurfacing, it's a little bit separate. In terms of the capital work with street reconstruction, that's for the projects that are a little bit more of a deeper cut, like literally of having to dig up the entire street and do work with sewers and water mains and that kind of thing, which is a lot more intensive versus resurfacing, which still allows traffic and other uses, even if not the most pleasant to drive over. But yes, that's definitely the case with resurfacing vis-a-vis these programs.
Thank you very much for clarifying. Joe Dweck, you had a question?
It's really a statement for you, Joanna, and our board that I think the past year obviously has been a quite unique circumstance here in New York City. People were working from home. People could not go to work. People were restricted in gathering, restricted in work, restricted in transportation. As well, we have had a very, very mild winter. I think that it would be foolish to permitize these regulations without further study, without further experience, and then temporary. I don't think it makes any sense to make permanent when we don't even know what would happen in a permanent situation when we're at full blast. It doesn't make sense to do that with so many unanswered questions, and I think it would be much wiser to extend a temporary situation to make it permanent. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Florencia, you had a question or a comment?
So I was just going to, well, something similar to what Joe just said, but about, what if the season gets, like we have storms, during the winter, and also that there are streets within Brooklyn where there are restaurants that are right next to each other, so they do, in the roadway, how does the sanitation truck get around that, or in between that, they can't. There are those.
Yes, those are both very good points, especially in terms of the sanitation, which is something that we have to be clear about in the permanent program of how that works. Yeah.
Gail Smith, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, this is a comment as well, and it's a piggyback on Joe and Florencia. First of all, I think all of us are very pleased that small business in particular and restaurant owners have found a way to be able to survive during the pandemic. Cacholia Road is booming right now, and I'm thrilled with that, but sometimes it's difficult depending on the area on Cacholia Road for pedestrians to even walk through. So I think that enforcement is going to be important because there are so many chairs and tables that are on the sidewalk now where literally it's difficult in some areas to even walk on the sidewalk as a pedestrian.
Thank you, Gail. That's definitely something that I'm in particular am concerned about. I think everywhere I walk now in the city, I'm looking and measuring 8 feet on everything since I'm so cognizant of it now. So that's something that I don't have a lot of patience with restaurants, frankly, if they're violating that rule. And that's not something that we want to happen now or in the permanent program. So if there are any specific complaints that you want to send to our office about that, we can, we'll take those and look into those. And if it's a more general comment too, that's something that we have heard and we have been cognizant of, and we want to make sure we get it right with the permanent program.
Sean Campbell, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick point of clarification, maybe correction even. There, you had a bullet point that said DSNY was still going to be responsible for garbage collection, but of course they don't collect for restaurants. That's all private carding. So just if you would review that in the presentation and make it clearer. I worry a little bit also with sanitation that we have not as much as a lot of districts, but still some courtesy double parking for ASP for broom days. And so I think that there's going to be, and I've seen for a fact that there's a conflict with double parking for the broom where there are open streets for restaurants. And then, so those are my comments there, but I also have a question. If you could remind me or clarify which ones community boards will have input on, which applications, whether it's sidewalks or streets, and why it's one and not the other, when restaurants will be able to apply for both so that they can have tables and chairs on the street and on the sidewalk, and we'll have say in one and not the other, and that just seems kooky.
Right, so just to clarify, in terms of that question, for sidewalks, we're not looking to change the community board review process at this time, because doing so would require a charter change. So the community board review for sidewalk cafes is charter mandated. And in terms of the roadway program, it's a brand new program and we're creating a different process for it. So we do not expect formal community board approval for individual applications in that program, but we'll obviously want to remain engaged with community boards in about the program. And the plan is to have a 4-year license for these locations with terms with annual review. So those reviews would invite feedback, which would of course include enforcement actions during those times, would include 311 complaints, and would include feedback from community boards.
I think that's bad. Not having community board input is bad.
Me too. Me too. Shahid Khan, you had a question or a comment?
Shahid, we can't hear you. You're muted, I believe.
Yeah, you're still muted. If you're calling in by phone, I believe you hit *6 to unmute yourself. You can, Shahid, we still can't hear you. Feel free to put a message in the chat, or you can send your comments to the office by email, or you can call. We definitely want to hear your input, okay?
Oh, you can listen me.
Yes. Oh, now I hear you. Yes.
Okay. So after the all discussion, my point of view is that when people are sitting outside, so what is the parameters regarding the noise pollution and environment pollution, that air pollution, and the food quality when the food come outside? So what is the parameters or any other assessment about this issue?
Right. So in terms of noise, like I was saying before, there would be no amplified sound allowed in the permanent program. There's no amplified sound allowed in the temporary program either. And those complaints would still be handled by NYPD. In terms of food, everything would still be subject to Department of Health inspections. And we're working with the Department of Health in order to create permanent rules that take into account the element of outdoor dining as part of that. So in our process for reviewing the applications, it would also include that information that comes from Department of Health reports as well.
So then this is my one follow-up question. Then everything is in process and things are not possible till 27th September. So this is very immature that we are working on this kind of projects. What do you think?
Well, the Department of Health still has every control over food and food processes of the restaurant as they would in the future. So they have those in place now. So if there's an issue With food, it would be going through them and their oversight of that, and the noise it would be the same as it is now, possibly with a few more parameters, but it's not something that is allowed right now to do that kind of noise.
Okay, thank you.
Florence, you had a comment or a question, and then I'll go ahead and I'll read Sean's comment in the chat.
Yes, thanks, Joanne. I just wanted to ask that you said that it's a four-year license or something like that. Was that what you said before? And so my question is that who would be responsible for erecting or removal of these structures? Because some are very lavish and some are very expensive. You could see, you have some that are simple and easy to be removed, but not all of them seem to be that way. So if it's granted that permanent granted to have permanency, then, in case of storms, in case of emergencies, or if they're revoked after a year's review, who then is responsible for the removal of such elaborate structures?
Right. That's a really good question. Thanks, Florencia. We've definitely seen a great amount of variety in terms of the creativity. Like you're saying, some of them are really elaborate and all of that and decorative and very nice, and others are, more functional and simplistic, but get the job done. And that's part of the reason why we want to have that longer transition into the permanent program. We want to give the restaurants an opportunity to see the permanent rules and guidelines well enough in advance to see if they still want to participate once the program is permanent. So locations will have to apply separately for the permanent program, other than what we have now in the temporary situation, and they will have to comply with any and all rules that may be different from their current setups now. So they will have to themselves figure out how to do that. And the hope is that they'll have enough time to decide whether or not they want to proceed. Right now, I think we're going to have a similar setup in the permanent program as we do in the temporary program in terms of removal. So right now, all the roadway seating must be used and occupied within 30 days of the authorization of it. And if it's not occupied or used for any 30-day period at all, we can deem it abandoned, and the restaurant themselves has to remove it. And if we find that they haven't removed it, the city can go in after providing sufficient notice that we would do this and remove it ourselves. And, that's not an option that anyone wants. We have had to do it occasionally in the temporary program where that's happened, either because a restaurant refuses or more likely a restaurant had unfortunately closed and they are very much true to the definition of abandoned. So that does happen. And I imagine that that would be a similar setup in the permanent program.
And Sean had dropped in the chat, I quote, "I forgot to ask how DOT anticipates outdoor restaurants to impact future considerations of bike lanes or bus lanes."
Yeah, this goes back to what I was saying before about having those competing uses for the streets and having to come up with the best response that serves the public in those situations. So it's not an easy answer. It's we have in previous situations of some bike lanes, we've been able to, if we do have curbside ones, to switch the parkings. We do have some situations now where we have roadway dining, we have the sidewalk, and then the curb, and then bike lane, and then roadway dining. So those are situations where we've had that. I'm trying to think if we have any. I don't think we have any conflicts right now with bus lanes, but it is something that we have to keep in mind for the future. I know also part of the issue now is that a lot of restaurants would like to participate, but can't because there is a bus lane in front of them, or it's a no parking spot, or it's a hydrant. So there are those considerations that would still be in place in the permanent program of restaurants that have those locational issues would not be able to cite it there. Hopefully, they would be able to participate in the sidewalk aspect of it to get some outdoor seating if they really want. But those are definitely considerations that we have to keep in mind going forward. Yes.
Glenn Wallen, go ahead with your question or comment.
Comment. Thank you. Also a question. Seems to me that the existing program, where necessary because of COVID, has existing problems that are not being adequately addressed. And what you're proposing presents an enormous array of possible future problems that we know will also not be adequately addressed. So the question is, why are you doing this at all? Are you assuming that COVID will be with us forever? That we need a permanent program? Because if COVID is gone in a year or two, then why do we need this type of a program? That's it. Thank you.
Gotcha. You know, a part of that is we have seen that the pandemic has seemed to ebb and flow in terms of, unfortunately, you know, even when we did get indoor dining back, it was closed again and for a while. And even now that we are allowed to do full capacity in restaurants, indoor dining, a lot of people still do not feel comfortable dining indoors and want to be outside. Obviously, I don't have the answer to how long COVID will be with us, and no one on the call does, and no one anywhere does, and that's unfortunate. But additionally, I just wanted to say that we have seen such a robust response and popularity of use with this program that is, I assume, why the City Council passed the law to make this permanent. So we're charged with following that direction to do so.
I'd like to go ahead and have the committee start discussing their recommendations on this text amendment. I also want to point out that Board Member Deborah Valentin had posted in the chat. I just want to direct both Jonah and Dash to read that comment. So I'd like to start with the recommendation process by finding out whether committee members and interested board members here tonight want to approve with conditions or recommend to approve with conditions to the full board, or to not approve, to say no. Steve Cohen first, and then Barton.
Thanks, Joanne. I guess the question is, can we just take no position if we think you know, things are a little too preliminary? And you know, as someone who's, you know, in general supportive of the program, and you know, I think there's definitely some good features of it, but a lot of what's been discussed makes me uncomfortable. You know, I kind of don't want to take a side at this point. So I'm just wondering if there's kind of an in between, and we just kind of punt.
Can I work with Jonah to try to answer that question? Because I had this issue in some of our previous zoning text amendment recommendations with DCP, and there isn't really a good place for just that, you know, we support the concept, but we don't think the plan is ready for prime time. So DCP suggested we abstain, but we're not abstaining. We actually have a lot to say. So Jonah, do you want to clarify? I mean, what we would do is either deny with conditions or support with conditions. But I don't think, I think that what you just said should be another option in the drop-down menu. And Jonah, maybe there's been further discussion since the time I had my tantrum over the summer.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. We have to categorize recommendations either approve or disapprove with or without conditions. That's just the formality of the submission process, which not only applies to community boards but also borough presidents, and eventually to the city planning commission as well. But that being said, if there is an outside form of recommendation that doesn't neatly fall into that, that doesn't preclude me from sharing that with DOT, with the drafters of the text amendment. But if you do choose to submit a recommendation, unfortunately, you have to. It has to be within one of those categories. I would say that what's most valuable for us is the conditions. Obviously, we feel strongly that this text amendment is appropriate for many reasons. But if you choose to approve or disapprove, what matters, I think, most and is really just laying out the conditions and being clear about ways to improve and or just being really clear about what your concerns are. So I just want to, sorry for the long-winded answer, but yeah.
Barden, you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, thanks. I've got to say how impressive it is that the committee, given just like 1 hour of deliberation, came up with so many, at this point, anticipated issues that we feel have not been thoroughly addressed. I mean, imagine if we had a committee deliberating on this for a month, the laundry list of possible issues that we would want further, details on, it would be really, really extensive. So again, to Steve's point, while I feel, very much that, it's worked wonderfully, it's kept, those 100,000 jobs from being lost, and some wonderful restaurants, from going under. I just don't feel that we could come up with enough stipulations, conditions to, even, try to nudge a approve or deny in the direction we really want to do it. So I think we're probably going to have to come down on one side or another. Personally, I'd have to say, just given, the possible unforeseen problems, I would have to go with deny. Thanks.
Florencia, you have a comment?
So just, well, question sort of. A comment to say that when Sean asked the question, it was stated that the board has no input into the sidewalk cafes because they're charter mandated. So I wanted to know then what exactly is our role? Is it for the roadway cafes that we're supposed to have an input on, or what exactly is required of us as the board? Thank you.
So the community board would be able to weigh in on sidewalk cafes because they are charter mandated. So as per the charter, we would give feedback on applications for sidewalk cafes. Because roadway cafes are new, they are not included in the charter, we would not be able to review applications. And please correct me if I'm wrong, our experts here.
Just want to say that's correct. And I think, Jonah, if you maybe wanted to clarify what, beyond that, what this zoning text change would do tonight again about for sidewalk cafes specifically. And I think you're muted.
Sorry, Kate, did you first want to clarify the rules?
Yes, just to repeat what Joanne said. Sidewalk cafes are referred to the community boards. Roadway cafes are in sort of a different category of public review, and they are by the city charter still subject to public hearings. They just don't have a community board referral the way these sidewalk cafes do. I know that's a little confusing. I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and Dash, I have a question for DOT. My understanding is that there is an effort to help streamline the process, so boards will have a chance to review both, not just the sidewalk cafes, but roadway cafes. Is that being considered? I think I'm not maybe up to date with that conversation.
I don't have any more information in terms of that beyond with what I said before. But yeah, I think that might be in terms of the sidewalk aspect of it would be maybe streamlining that to make it easier. Yeah.
Gail Smith, you have a comment?
I'm somewhat ambivalent and torn about this whole matter, and I can speak personally in reference to Cotillia Road because I am very close to Cotillia Road, and I'm constantly up and down that strip from 17th Street to Coney Island Avenue, and it's really booming right now. And that part gives me pause in saying, no, I'm going to reject it, because these are businesses that are being able to make a living, and the communities are actually patronizing them. So I think I would go back to Steve Cohen's suggestion, as well as when Jonah said you can either approve with conditions or disapprove of conditions. I think for me, it would be approve with conditions.
I'm sorry, I've been trying to raise my hand. I don't think it's working on my phone.
Oh, go ahead, Hindi, please.
Okay. I agree with Gail and Steve. I love these cafes actually. I've been enjoying them tremendously with my family. And I have a lot of friends who enjoy them. Again, I'm concerned about all the things that we've brought up as well, but I think that maybe if there was a better plan in place and all these things were considered, I mean,
You cut out there, Hindi. Are you finished?
Yeah, did we lose you, Hindi? We lost
you, oh, I'm sorry. I guess someone was calling, so you didn't hear I was talking. I was basically saying I would love to be able to approve it. But again, because of all these concerns, maybe if we had like really tight guidelines that really governed it, we would be more inclined to be able to approve it as a board if they were really put in place and if there was a way that it really could be monitored well, because there were a lot of very issues that were concerning. But as a patron of these outdoor cafes, I love them. I really do. It's so much more enjoyable, even without COVID. Just to be outside and be able to eat. Like when you go away, when it's sort of like an out of town kind of feel. I don't know. I just enjoyed it more than even eating inside. And a lot of people feel that way as well. So I would love to be able to approve it. But again, if we could assuage the concerns that have been brought up in like a definite way.
Thank you, Hindi. Steve Cohen.
Thanks. I think one thing that's been on my mind throughout this is I don't have I know how I feel about it. I know how generally about the issue. I know, I've heard a lot of positive feedback, from friends, from news media, all that sort of thing. But I don't think I have a great sense of like, okay, in Community District 14, here is the feedback we've been getting from community members and from restaurants as to what's been working and what hasn't, and has it generally been a positive experience, and what, to the extent there are issues, what those issues are, because I think in order to properly weigh in here, I kind of want to have a little better sense of the feedback locally, to the extent the district office has been getting feedback, which I assume it has. So I don't know, Sean, if you could weigh in a little bit on that.
I totally agree. And if we had had a fair 90 days to actually go ahead and do the work on this, not dropped on us on June 30th, then we would have a lot more data on how the actual community feels about it. And to look at our 301 service requests and, ask our merchants. Glenn Wallen.
Thank you. I'd like to bring something else up that no one has talked about as yet. There's winners and losers. We're in an emergency situation due to a pandemic, so we instituted some emergency measures. I think were great. I'm very happy that it happened. It kept a lot of businesses alive. But what if you are a business that paid a very high rent to be established, but you happen to be in a place where you cannot put out curbside or street extension to your business, and some other business that paid very little for rent can now expand? This isn't a fair situation, and it's not one that should be in place for a prolonged length of time. This COVID situation is totally unprecedented, and for you to look back and say, well, we've seen some ups and downs in the past, therefore anything for the future, is just wrong. What's happening now is different, and we have two possible directions. One is, as more and more people are getting vaccinated, we'll see the end of this in the next 6 months, a year, 2 years. The other possibility is another variant will come up and we'll get plunged deep into it. We have no idea what the future is going to hold. So at this point in time, to be looking to put something in place that's permanent, I think is premature and ridiculous, and I vote a strenuous no to approval on this. Thank you.
Florencia, and then we really do need to come to some kind of consensus about whether we're going to approve, disapprove, approve with conditions, disapprove with conditions, or just straight up no.
I just quickly wanted to say that I have patronized some of these. However, I must say that I felt unsafe in the roadway on a small narrow street, and the truck was coming down. Some of them you feel safe within, others you do not feel so. Well, I didn't feel so safe, but I have enjoyed, even within our community and outside of our community. So, but I am agreeing with all what Glenn said, what you've said, and what Sean have said. So thank you. Go ahead. Thank you very much.
So I think, we don't have too many people on here. I think we should just go ahead and do, I'm just going to do, this vote is going to be either to disapprove or to approve with conditions, so that we can get a sense of where we need to go from here. And because I mean, we can take the time and we can spend the rest of September discussing it and creating recommendations, but we may not, I'm not 100% satisfied that our comments are going to come across the way that they need to if we miss the deadline on the 27th. Even though we've been assured, I do want to try to stick to the deadline. So I'm just going to go ahead through my chat and call one by one and let me know if you want to approve with conditions. But Jonah, is there, or Sean, is there an option to disapprove with conditions? I didn't think that that was a thing. Is there?
Yes. But I have a question for you procedurally, Joanne. If the board is going to approve or disapprove with conditions, are you also attempting to identify or enumerate those conditions that would go?
Well, I've been thinking about this, and I think we have a list here, but that's also not possible. So I guess what's going to happen is if we approve with recommendations, we're going to have to go back into another meeting at some point, hopefully by the beginning of October, so that we can formulate an actual list of recommendations. So, you know, this is where the Department of City Planning has put us, flying by the seat of our pants. So,
Joanne,
how do you feel?
if
Yes.
I just want to quickly say that if you need additional time, a few weeks or a month, that's perfectly fine. I don't anticipate that the City Planning Commission will vote for at least a few weeks or a month. Of course, that could change, but if you need if you need more time, by all means, we can do that, and we can respond to questions. I understand the position that the board is in, so if time is a major constraint, I don't want that to be at least where we are right now in the process.
Well, let me tell you where I'm coming from, because, you know, the borough board asked the commission to push back our deadline, and they did not. So they have an agenda, they have a timeline that they want to keep. So I want to make sure that our community is represented in what is presented to the commission. So if I feel like, while I think that you're extending time to us, the commission is not extending time to us. Does that make sense? Because otherwise they would have extended the time for all of the community boards throughout the 5 boroughs, which they did not do.
So because a text amendment is a non-ULURP item, there's a bit more flexibility as far as when a board can submit, and even if the board submits late, as a general practice, we always make sure to incorporate it. So I think in a borough board setting, maybe, I don't know who spoke on behalf of the department, but it's possible they may have taken a firm stance on it. But generally speaking, we always make sure to include community board's recommendation.
I mean, understood. For the record, the borough president sent a letter to the commission asking for the date to be extended to October 22nd. It is still, the deadline is still September 27th. So we obviously cannot make recommendations tonight. We have a good set of notes, and we have the recording of this meeting. So again, I just want to get a sense of how we're going to report out to the board on Monday, whether this committee and interested board members want to approve with conditions, disapprove conditions, or just disapprove. Gail, you have a comment?
Yeah, just going back to Jonah and knowing for sure, definitely, that we will be allowed extra time. I think that this is a very serious thing that we are looking at. And on Monday, when we do have our board meeting, I do feel we need to have a robust discussion with the board members to get a feel for where they're coming from as well, because I do feel that many of the board members have probably also had the chance to partake of the dining, the sidewalk dining. So if we do definitely have, at least another month, Madam Chair, I think it would be good for us to do that.
So your recommendation is we we defer tonight, and we reconvene this discussion in front of the full board on Monday.
I like that idea.
Well, it's basically yes, only because we have all raised so many questions, but yet many of us do feel that it's the right thing to do, but it has to be done correctly. And therein lies the problem. Right now, there are too many unanswered questions, and we need to resolve those and have time to do that. And clearly, from what you did say, Madam Chair, it's very important. Right now, we have a deadline. The deadline is, the end of this month. We need to have assurances that we have at least another month, so that when we do respond, we'll be responding, with everyone's input.
I appreciate that. So long as Jonah, I'm going to hold you to it. We're going to, we're going to take as much time as we need to get this done. Everybody on the call last night from the borough board said the same thing over and over again. This was just, not enough time for us to deliberate on such a huge program that's going to impact so many people. Glenn Wallen, you had a comment?
Well, it seems to me that having this discussion Monday night will be useful, but only minimally so. What we would really need to do is have a public hearing, especially, for example, for those restaurants that are on residential streets. The people who live near them should have an opportunity to have a say in this. There are a lot of people who should have an opportunity to have a say in it, so that we could decide not just on our own personal experience, but we're supposed to represent the community. What does the community think about this? If anyone wants to consider approval with recommendations, what the heck are those recommendations supposed to be? I could give you a list of my own personal, but that doesn't make them valid to anybody who lives in the area or lives near one of these restaurants. I would need to hear from them. And since I don't see any way for that to happen in a reasonable time frame, I'm still on a no. Thank you.
And you got the tune on, Mister.
It is.
Where's my coffee?
Okay, so then what I'm hearing is we will defer to making it. If you're sorry, can you just, anyone out there that's not muted, please mute yourself. So what I'm hearing is because we need to have additional discussions and we need to talk to, we need to be able to gather 311 data and talk to our community members and talk to our merchants. We will defer making any recommendation to the board during the chair's report. On Monday, we will have another discussion about this. But I just want to remind that it's going to be, it's going to be difficult to try to extrapolate all this information to the board without them seeing this presentation. So we may need to do this presentation again. Sean, you had something you wanted to add?
I just wonder if the recommendation can move forward, but the conditions can follow. So it could be a recommendation to approve or a recommendation to disapprove pending conditions that will be submitted to DCP by October, whatever. So that the recommendation is still in there in the timely fashion. The details are what follow. Jonah, does that make sense to you?
It does.
Or does it not matter? You can tell me it doesn't matter. I won't.
Yeah, again, I just come back to having experience with these. As long as you're submitting a recommendation to me, I will forward it immediately to folks. But technically, Sean, we really do need the recommendation to be complete. I don't know if we can do like an initial vote and then a follow up.
Well, that's kind of funny because that's what you're asking us to do for you.
I think if the choice is to submit a vote with further details later on, I think it's probably better to wait until you have the full recommendation, just from a procedural standpoint, because if you're inputting that information in our portal, you're going to have to choose like approve or disapprove with conditions. And then I guess to answer your question, it may be feasible, but my preference would strongly be to just submit everything together.
To have it complete. Got it.
I think that this committee should so move to continue this discussion on Monday. Unfortunately, I feel like I don't have a sense that people that are board members and committee members here are willing to approve or disapprove and then create the recommendations. I think they also want to see the full package. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yes.
And then just could I ask, board members did receive the list of the bullet points that from notes that I took at the preliminary DCP hearing, which I've also shared with Jonah. And so if you haven't taken a look at all of those, I think we asked only 1/10 of the questions that are on there.
All right. So we will defer making a decision, and we will have a discussion about this during the general meeting on Monday. So bring a cup of coffee. It's going to be a long one. And I just want to thank Jonah and Dash and Diana and Kate for being here and presenting and answering our questions and tolerating our frustrations. I really appreciate it. It's not personal. And let us, we'll be in touch about what happens on Monday.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So committee and board members, we have some other items that on our agenda that we have to go through. So we'll go ahead and we'll move into the orientation for new board members. I did see one new board member. Hi, Yvette Fajan. How are you?
And Melissa's here too.
And Melissa, I saw you too. I was going to call you out. Welcome. First, let me extend a warm welcome to new members and those reappointed by a council member or the borough president. We are currently entrenched in a very challenging atmosphere where community board feedback is perhaps being trampled, perhaps being suppressed, and as such, it is our community's feedback that is also being impacted by this. So we must remain strong and resolute to continue to engage with the community we represent and to synthesize their feedback into community position. So I just want to bring your attention to a few matters of the bylaws for new members who maybe aren't acquainted with them. Also want to preface that we currently have a bylaws committee that is reviewing these bylaws and updating them for clarity and making some other changes that we think would benefit how we function as an organization. So I just want to read to you the purposes of the board. The purposes of the board shall be to consider the needs of the district and develop plans for the district's welfare and orderly development. Advise the borough president, city planning commission, and all city agencies with respect to any matter relating to the welfare of the district and its residents. Assist city departments and agencies in making contact with and transmitting information to the people of the district. Keep the public informed on matters relating to the welfare and development of the district, and such other purposes set forth in the city charter and in the New York State law. A few other items of the bylaws that I wanted to point out to new members or returning members who just need a refresher. Section 3, membership, paragraph B. An appointed member may be removed from the community board for cause, which shall include substantial non-attendance at board or committee meetings over a period of 6 months, by the borough president or by a majority vote of the community board following a recommendation for removal from the executive committee. I think attendance is important, but please, if you have a conflict or if you have an emergency for either the general meeting or the committee, please do reach out to Sean and we will definitely work with you. Section D, all members shall serve on the board in their capacity as private citizens only. Their actions shall not be instructed by or be responsible to any other organization. Any member participating in the board's consideration of a matter involving self-serving or conflict of interest shall identify such interests and shall declare him or herself or they as not eligible to vote on such matters. Any member appearing before a governmental body or otherwise making a public statement which conflicts in any respect with positions adopted by the board shall not identify him, herself, or they as a member of the board when making such a statement. No member shall represent the board's position before any city or any other governmental agency or authority unless designated to do so by the board chairperson or the executive committee. I just want to give a gentle reminder to all of our board members that matters of service delivery are done at the office, not at board or committee meetings. So if you have a concern about your area, please call or email the board office about your service delivery request, complaint, or concern. I encourage all the new board members that will be joining us for the next 2 years and our current members to review the bylaws. And I also want to point out that before convening for the summer, we created the Lunch and Learn series, which was focused on zoning. And we had some really great guests that participated and created a wonderful educational space that will live in perpetuity. I hope I still like my hair in 10 years. So when you have some time, check it out on the YouTube channel. It's a great resource in addition to orienting to the bylaws. Sean, did I miss anything on orienting our new members?
No, I think that's a good overview, and both Yvette and Melissa have been good about reaching out directly with questions, and they've been participating even before becoming members. So I think you know, nod if you agree or jump in if you don't. You kind of have a sense of how things operate, how we groove.
And I just wanted to give the opportunity to Melissa and Yvette to say a few words if they care to. Otherwise, you don't have to, no pressure. So just raise your hand and I'll bring you to bat. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next item. Okay, well, we really welcome and we look forward to working with you. And the next item on the agenda is regarding community board meetings. Governor Hochul and the state legislature has passed a bill suspending the open meetings law, and this makes room for meetings to be held virtually. Borough Hall is continuing with virtual meetings, and at this time, I'd like to hear how the executive committee and the interested board members are in attendance on continuing to have committee and general meetings virtually until January when the suspension expires. Carl, go ahead.
I give it a 10. I gave it a 10. I support this.
Okay.
Done.
Ms. Smith? Gail, did you have a comment regarding keeping our meetings virtually until January?
I'm sorry, I inadvertently had not unmute myself. It was a 10 to Carl.
Glenn Wallen?
As much as I was looking forward to seeing people on Monday, I think it'd be much safer if we continued remotely for a while. Thank you.
So this item, in fact, I'd like to, Sean?
I also want to point out it's much less expensive. The cost to running the virtual the in-person meetings, we were going to get help from our good friend Mark Moss and Montana and the good people of Harris Studios, but it was a pretty penny. It was going to be at $325 to $350 per meeting, and that was with getting the space for free. So it could have gone up, and that was so we'll. I just wanted to put forth the financial responsibility with that too.
And that's fair since our budget was cut and we didn't get that little bonus that we were getting for 2 years from our great council member. So this is an item that I would like to put as a recommendation to the full board. I feel like there's a positive vibe here regarding keeping our meetings virtually. So I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the full board, recommend to the full board to accept committee and general meetings to be held virtually until the suspension expires.
I second the motion.
Seconded.
Okay, so I'll just abbreviate it. Is there anyone opposed to meeting virtually? Is there anyone abstaining from voting, meeting virtually? Okay, so unanimously, we will make a recommendation to the full board to accept committee and general meetings to be held virtually until the suspension expires. Okay, last item for business. So I want to just talk about the one text amendment that came before the board before we convened in June. This is the food retail expansion to support health, also known as Fresh. So this came, so after our discussion, there seemed to be a lot of interest about protecting our single-story grocery stores. And so as a reminder, Community Board or Community District 14 was not included in the reboot or the expansion of the Fresh project. But there was an identification that we have very many single-story, single taxpayer grocery stores that are ripe for development. I'm not sure that you know that the Key Food on Fifth Avenue near Baltic, the big Key Food with the big parking lot, that Key Food no longer exists. That property is being developed, and as far as I know, grocery store is not returning to the space. There is an associated market on Nostrand Avenue in Community Board 9. That grocery store was also threatened by development. The community was able to get the developer to return the market once the development was complete. So, and Melissa, I'll take your question or comment once I'm done explaining where I'm going with this. So, Borough Hall, because this text amendment came out over the summer, they identified some districts that would benefit from having Fresh extended into their district. And they heard our concerns about our single-story grocery stores in the district and created and added us to their resolution. The resolution did not pass last night, but I do want to bring this to the committee because I want to be able to add this to the what's known as the ZAP portal, which is how we communicate the board's position to Department of City Planning. So the resolution included the following about Community District 14. The northern end of Community District 14 includes multiple single-story taxpayer supermarkets with extensive development rights. Therefore, in order to provide the fresh incentive to underserved areas and areas at risk of becoming underserved, the Brooklyn Borough Board calls for Community District 14 to be included as part of Appendix A maps, fresh food store designated areas, though for Community District 14, north of Avenue H, fresh zoning floor area exemption shall be applicable to development sites already occupied by one-story supermarkets. So in summary, We would not be creating incentives for new supermarkets. We would be protecting our existing supermarkets that are single story and could be ripe for development. Melissa, your hand went away. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to just clarify that for Fifth Avenue, that key food, it actually is also part of one of these agreements for the redevelopment. It's part of a community benefits agreement there where it's going to be a grocery store that cannot be higher income. It has to be one that's larger than the key food that was already there and good for the community as well.
Okay, that's great news. Thank you for updating us on that. But we don't want it to be such a difficult process that it was for the Key Food and also for the Associated on Nostrand Avenue and Community Board 9. What I'm asking the executive committee and interested board members in attendance is to consider a motion to recommend to accept this modified draft resolution that was issued yesterday on 9/8 as it relates to Community District 14. Does anyone have any questions or concerns?
Be able to, sorry, Joanne, would you be able to put that text in the chat, or do we have it in written form?
Let me see if I can get it for you. Give me a minute.
Do you want to dictate it and I'll type it out, Joanne?
I mean, I have what was sent last night. I can just copy and paste it.
Okay.
So it's just right here. I just have to get it.
Thank you.
So I did not author this. This was authored by the Director of Land Use. And this will be the last item on the agenda, so I appreciate you. Hopefully this works. There you are. So this is, so what I read to you did not include the other community districts. I just edited it so you could read what was germane to CD14, but there's the full text. And there's one other part that I'll give you. The other part, it just says the northern, and I'm looking for a multiple, it should be at the top. Oh. I'll just type it. This is gonna be.
The north of Avenue H is there, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, there was a part in the beginning of the document. I just wanted to make sure that you saw all parts of it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And this is the clip from higher up in the resolution. So again, as I said, the resolution failed, did not pass last night because most members abstained, because most boards did not have an opportunity to meet to see a presentation about this text amendment, and were not reachable to add to the resolution. But we were able to add to the resolution with the help of Borough Hall. So what I'd like to do is be able to take this recommendation that Borough Hall put in the resolution and put it into our ZAP portal, so that when this goes to the commission, we will be considered as a small extension of the FRESH program. Steve, are you satisfied with what I sent?
I guess what I'm hung up on a little bit is, are we, if some restaurant location, we've had, our series of meetings during our lunch and learns about, development and need for housing and all that. So I'm just wondering, if some site that a supermarket's on is, some great site for, otherwise a great site for, some development, like, is this dissuading development on one story for anywhere that a one-story supermarket exists? I'm just trying to understand what's going on here.
Well, this is not a mandate to keep the supermarket. It's an incentive to keep the supermarket. So let's say the ideal supermarket on the corner of Clarkson and Bedford became a development site. The developer would not be prohibited from removing the market, but he would be incentivized for returning the market. So if he or she or they decided that they did not want to keep the supermarket, then that is their right. As of right, they don't have to. If they wanted to, they would be incentivized to in this program.
And the incentive is extra bulk, right? It's extra FAR.
Yeah, I believe it winds up being one additional floor. Then I don't know. There are some more robust tax incentives for there are like truly fresh, like ones where they were trying to build markets. So they got a lot of tax incentives, and then there was hiring from within the community, and you would get additional payroll tax incentives. But I think we're on the softer scale where they would just get additional bulk to return the market to its space.
Does it seem like it's enough to at least bring it to the full board? And if those who aren't comfortable with it, still aren't comfortable with it, can vote against a motion to include it?
Steve, you have your hand up.
It was a separate issue from what Sean just raised, but I was just curious why it's written cutting off at Avenue H. What the basis of that was?
In consultation with the council member, the council member felt that the program wasn't necessary below Avenue H, that the smaller individual markets that cater to one specialty is the custom that wants to be kept, and the council member did not want incentives in place in that area to protect the smaller shops and that way of getting food resources. So again, I'm trying to figure out if this is something that the executive committee and interested board members that would like to add to our comments to the ZAP portal to DCP or not. I think that this, in discussions with Richard Barrick from Borough Hall, he seemed to understand the concern about these soft sites that we have throughout the northern part of the district, and the risk that we could lose our markets to development. So are we at an impasse? Do I have any other comments or concerns? Or go ahead, Steve.
If I might, I'm not quite sure how to think this through as to whether it's more beneficial or detrimental to our area. On the surface, it sounds like anything that improves the possibility of better quality food is a good idea. But when it comes to incentives for keeping one-story structures, I'm not so sure. So
no, this is not an incentive to keep a one-story structure. It's an incentive to return a market to a structure that would be built as of right. So
I'm sorry, Joanne, go ahead.
So if on the corner of Clarkson Avenue and Bedford Avenue, they wanted to develop the site, which is a single-story grocery store, the developer would develop the site and could choose an incentive to return the market to the ground floor. But it's not a deterrent to developing for affordable housing or any of that matter.
Okay, thank you. Well, if that's true, then I think I'm leaning in favor.
Joanne, I also want to remind board members that there was a presentation on the fresh zoning text amendment back in the spring. The board at that time, because CB14 wasn't included in the proposal, we didn't opine on it. But the board did state in a letter that went to DCP that it was interested in becoming drawn into the program. So this would just be a continuation of a stance a position that the board has already publicly taken and is on public record. It just whittles down the area because Borough Hall supported writing it in.
Gail, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I would like to recommend approval of what the chair is asking for. There are two, once again, I'm being selfish and I apologize, but I do live in Ditmas Park and hey, I do frequent Cotelia Road. And there are actually, one of the sites is a Key Food on Cotelia Road, which is a one-story that the community at large does not want to lose. And we also have the food co-op that's also a one-story. So to be able to protect them, I think would be a good thing to do.
Steve, you have your hand up?
Yeah, if I understood Sean's comment before, it was basically to put the question before the full board. I think if that's what's being proposed, that makes a lot of sense to me. Just that we can, basically put this question before the full board on Monday. That seems to make sense.
Sean, was that what you were recommending?
I thought for the full board to take a position on it, that's what would need to be done, that the executive committee was going to recommend to the full board that this position be reiterated, which is basically what we would be doing since it has been stated before, reiterating in a more detailed manner what's already been presented to DCP and to add it to the ZAP portal as such. And if I misunderstood, I may have misunderstood you, Joanne, but I thought that this was a proposal that you were asking the executive committee to support to support adding this and then bringing that support to the full board. This is a recommendation coming out of committee.
Yes, this is the recommendation coming out of the committee. So I presented what was in the resolution. Because the resolution didn't pass, that means the resolution is not going to go before the commission, but we still have the opportunity to communicate with CPC about this matter through the portal. So what I'm asking is for the executive committee and interested members to recommend to either accept the language in the resolutions, and then we can go ahead and put it before the full board.
I accept.
I accept. Gail Smith.
Deep and Alexa.
Okay with me, Glenn.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstain? Okay, so the recommendation will make the executive committee recommends to accept the language of the modified draft resolution that was issued on September 8th as it relates to Community District 14 so that we can add it to the portal so the Department of City Planning can consider it in their text amendment. That's all that I have. This was a very long meeting. Thank you very much. If no one has any other comments or concerns, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Adjourn. Seconded. Oh.
Seconded?
Second.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. I'll see you on Monday and bring a cup of coffee for this lengthy conversation.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Have a night, Sean.
Good night.